Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dynasty Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual co-host, Russell Clay. Say hello, Russ.
Aloha.
So, Russ, we've been gone for 2 weeks. It's not that long yet. There's been a ton of things that have happened in that time frame, namely free agency, which you and I will get to, all the big players moving around, and what that will do to their dynasty stock. But first, as we are wont to do, the news and notes section, Russ. And, we should have known this. The news and notes section is pretty much just like the depressing part of the show.
The Friday news dump.
It really is. And it's never good. It's never like, oh, hey, somebody's coming out of retirement and we get to watch them again or something. It's always somebody gets hurt, somebody gets suspended, etc. So this week, no different. The big news, Martavis Bryant suspended for an entire year for failing a drug test. I don't know, Russ, where do we even start with this? I mean, look, he was suspended the first 4 games last year, and luckily, I like to think the Steeler offense, what kept chugging along without him. But this will be a whole season. So where do we start with this?
I think we really have to be careful with how we evaluate these guys that get suspended for drugs from now on. I mean, Blackman was sort of the first. I mean, obviously there's been drug issues throughout the NFL history, but within the last 5 to 7 years, Blackman, and we sort of just cast that aside. And then obviously Josh Gordon more recently. And now Martavis Bryant, it's sort of like this is becoming not only a trend, but pretty consistent. So I think it's something we do have to account for and be careful for, especially in dynasty leagues, because this is another case where, just like Josh Gordon, people assumed in terms of dynasty value that he was just going to be fine and this was behind him forever. So they were drafting him in the 3rd or 4th round of startups. And I think you just really have to hedge, even if you really like him as a prospect after a while, if they get these drug type of suspensions.
All right, Russ. So first question, let's look at Bryant's dynasty stock first. Let's hear where you had him before the suspension, as the season ended, and then where you got him now.
He was right around wide receiver 20. For me, wide receiver 25, and I think I was a little on the conservative side. So, he's a freak athlete. In a small sample size in both seasons, he was tremendously productive. A great offense. So, before this year-long suspension, you did have the red flags, but it's really tough to account for that when you see the crazy potential he's shown, but that's kind of where I'm at now, where once you see that suspension, you kind of have to hedge.
So what's the lowest you would give up for Martavis Bryant? Assuming the suspension sticks and he doesn't play for a year. Let's go rookie draft picks. What would you be willing to give up, this year before we know where the rookies are going to go for Martavis Bryant, knowing that he's not going to play for you for a year?
Well, as a dynasty owner, if I have a lot of cost already sunk into him, it might be a hold. But if I can get a mid-first, I know I see a lot of people like, no way I'm selling right now, no way. But I don't want any part of him anymore. I don't trust that. The chances he plays in the NFL again aren't like 100% anymore. So I don't trust this. And if I can get out from under this and get sort of 1.5 to 1.7 in a rookie draft, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and I think, it's an interesting scenario, really, because I think you might have some people that for that kind of draft pick, that 1.5, 1.7, they might do it. It's not as if this draft, at least so far, is like star-studded. It's very top-heavy. And I might count myself as one of those that might pull that trigger. Obviously it depends on where your current dynasty team is and stuff like that, but he's just really good, man. And he's on a really good team. And look, the principal parties in Pittsburgh are not going anywhere. It's not like Roethlisberger is going to retire. Antonio Brown's certainly not going anywhere. So I don't know, man. I might do that. I mean, if it were a late first, I might do that like no problem.
Now, there is the other side of the coin where you buy him, like if you bought Josh Gordon last year for a reduced price or any type of semi-reduced price, you hit big because his ADP in Dynasty Leagues has gone right back to pretty much where it was before. I mean, obviously not first round, but people are right back to fully believing he's going to be reinstated and fully believing that he's going to be a top 10 to top 5 dynasty receiver again, which I don't believe. But I mean, if you think you're willing to take the gamble on that type of move and maybe either sell off next year or hope he turns it around, I mean, that's an interesting play as well. But I'm just not touching it.
You're done. You can't even anymore.
I can't even.
All right, so let's get to some more pressing matters with this situation, Russ. Is it pretty obvious Sammy Coates is the guy that's next up to take over that kind of production? And just so people have some sort of frame of reference, Martavis Bryant last year in 3/4 of a season, 50 catches, 765 yards, 6 touchdowns. In 3/4 of a season, that's not bad. So, Sammy Coates is the logical choice, Russ. Is it, a slam dunk that he's the guy that's going to pick up the slack there?
So again, this was the talk last year in terms of Wheaton versus Bryant and sort of who's going to be the number 2 receiver. And when you look at the season end totals, even when Bryant came back, Wheaton, like they both produced. Obviously, Bryant is the more talented of the player, but Wheaton ended up with, I believe, 750 receiving yards. So Coates is going to be the deep threat. Wheaton is not a deep threat. Wheaton is a slot receiver. I see Coates, he projected as a deep threat out of college. That's just the type of player he is. He was at Auburn, over 20 yards per reception. So he's going to be running those deep routes. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, but we obviously love Ben Roethlisberger's deep ball. I think that could be an interesting proposition. But I see a little bit of overcorrection on Coates right now. I don't think you can just slot him in. I do think he's going to get targets, but Darius Hayward-Bay is there as well. Sort of, he's going to suck up some targets as well.
All right, so last question, Russ. Pick one of the 3 to draft in Dynasty this year to have. Sammy Coates, Marcus Wheaton, Darius Hayward-Bay. I'm not saying it was like a fun choice, Russ, but it has to be done. Antonio Brown can't catch 200 balls, right?
I would probably take the risk on Coates just because he is that freak athlete and he is that deep threat who could become sort of that flex wide receiver, solid wide receiver 3, maybe even hinge on a wide receiver 2 if everything goes perfectly. Wheaton is more of ceiling as a flex, maybe 800, 900 yards at his ceiling. So I kind of like Coates more for upside.
Okay. Well, and look, he's a little younger. And like you said, he projects more to be the most similar to Martavis than the other 2. So, all right, Russ. Well, let's get to the aforementioned Josh Gordon. Take that toy away, Russ.
Oh, he's really into it right now. This little squirrel chew toy.
He really doesn't like this Martavis Bryant news. All right, so you mentioned Josh Gordon, another receiver who is actually coming to the end of his 1-year suspension, thankfully. So this could be some good news. Should the NFL ever actually reinstate Josh Gordon, which they haven't yet, and no one really knows why and no one really knows when. So, Russ, it's kind of a dicey situation. What do you do as a Gordon owner in Dynasty right now? Are you holding, or are you looking to sell high from those vultures that want to scoop him up?
Well, I wasn't someone who bought him last offseason, so I can't speak as a Josh Gordon owner. I know I'd be selling because you can get a huge premium on him right now. I mean, when you look at where he's going in terms of startup ADP, sort of late second, early third round, I'm definitely willing to take a chance on players in that range over him, considering he's not even reinstated yet. And I mean, one more issue and his career's done. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
It's another dicey situation, man. But look, I think we talked about it. I'm all about the Hugh Jackson love, man. I think he'll do some good things with players on that team. So it's hard to say what you would give up at this point because it's just an unknown, But yeah, it's unfortunate, I think is the word, because we obviously he did well 2 years ago and probably do well again. He's young enough, and it's just a waiting game at this point. So
right.
All right, Russ. Last news and note. Take us away. Case Keenum, yay or nay?
Yeah, Les Snead and Jeff Fisher have come out quite a few times this offseason with full-fledged confidence in their boy Case Keenum and him as their future quarterback. They said Nick Foles is going to come in and compete, but Case is looking like the guy right now, and I'm in shock. I don't get it. I don't understand. I don't know what he's done in his career for them to sort of come up with this idea. But I don't know. If this is it, I guess you take a stab on him in a 2-quarterback league. Obviously, there's no 1 QB value, but I mean, I don't understand, I guess.
I have a theory, Russ, and it's out there, but it's a theory. So as we know, the Rams are no longer the St. Louis Rams. They're the Los Angeles Rams, right? And they're playing in, I think it's the Olympic Stadium where USC plays, or the Coliseum, I should say, for the time being, or summer. The point is they're playing in a temporary site for now. My personal theory is they're waiting to load up until, they open that nice new stadium and, everything's brand new and all that. And I'm not saying they're tanking necessarily, but just the lack of free agency activity and not bringing anyone in at quarterback and still having Jeff Fisher there. It's very status quo. They might as well change their name, right? Because nothing's changed there. Nothing, right?
You're right.
My theory is they're going to wait. They're going to ride this year out. It's kind of we'll take a year off and we'll see you guys in 2017. And they'll have a nice new stadium to look forward to and all that kind of stuff. So personally, I don't look for that situation to change this year, as crazy as that sounds. I think they stick with what they got. I don't think they draft a quarterback in the first round. They could draft a receiver. I could see that. I mean, there's definitely more receivers that warrant a top 15 pick than a quarterback. But yeah, man, I don't think they're going to make any big moves for a quarterback anytime soon. And I think, look, it's with an eye towards the subsequent years, not this year.
That's a pretty solid theory. I don't know. It seems like, again, they're letting go of more pieces than they're really bringing in. Like you mentioned, Chris Long is gone. So the problem for me is they have some nice young pieces, and do you want these pieces to just suffer on a losing team? Once that losing culture gets installed, we kind of got to turn it around here quick, or else, I don't know, even those careers could be sort of undermined.
Yeah. I don't know. It's not good. I'm pretty sure we both agree there's really only one player to get on St. Louis, and that's I'm still in St. Louis. There's only one player to get on the Rams in Dynasty, Russ, and that would be Mr. Todd Gurley, who coincidentally might be the top pick in Dynasty leagues. So, but nonetheless. All right, Russ. Well, that ends this very depressing news and notes section. Let's get to some good news, though. We had several free agency signings while we were gone. It was a pretty whirlwind couple of days there, and several moves that have a lot of dynasty impact, obviously. So let's get with the running backs first, Russ. Who would you like to start with? This is the Russell Clay free agency hour. So who do you want to start with?
Oh, I think we have to start with ding, 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 Lamar Miller to Houston.
Mm-hmm.
As we mentioned before free agency in our preview show, whoever went to Houston for a running back, or if they did sign someone, was going to be the big winner, or if they drafted someone and they ended up going after Lamar Miller. I love everything about that. Again, I don't think they should just go out there and give him 350 carries. I don't think that's the type of player he is.
Why not? Come on.
But 300 carries in a Houston Texans, or 300 touches in a Houston Texans offense is top 5 fantasy running back material. So especially with him, he's a quality running back. He's relatively young. So, I mean, that's just a huge win for Lamar Miller owners.
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, as we know, I loved Lamar Miller before this. Houston, I'm not going to say it was the best place to go. I think we'd all agree Dallas would have been super fun. But look, Houston's not bad either. I mean, they run zone blocking. They've got a good young team. And look, they signed Lamar Miller. They made him a priority, which tells me, look, he's going to get the ball way more than he got it in Miami ever. Mm-hmm. And here's, perhaps the best news of all, at least for Lamar Miller owners. So these are the teams, Russ, that he will be playing next year as far as team defense goes, yards allowed. So 12th was Tennessee. I don't think they've done a whole lot in free agency as far as the draft goes. I'm sorry, as far as their defense goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got Jacksonville. Wait, hold on. Yeah, you've got Jacksonville at 24th best defense last year. And look, they've got Fowler coming back from injury. They did sign Malik Jackson. I do expect them to be improved, but I don't expect them to be a top 10 defense next year. Mm-mm. And then you've got Indianapolis at 26, who, per the usual, did nothing on defense in terms of free agency this year. So, I mean, if I'm Lamar Miller dynasty owner, I am licking my chops at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about that. That's 6 games of his fantasy schedule. So, I mean, when we look at season-long totals before the year, we kind of get excited. But really that week to week, when you start to get Jacksonville in week 12 or whenever they play them, or sort of Indianapolis week 14 and stuff like that, those are the huge matchups that sort of win you fantasy weeks. So, yeah, that's definitely going to be a major advantage for him going forward.
All right, so real quick, Russ, Dynasty Startup, what running back ranking do you label Mr. Lamar Miller? Top 5, top 10, top 15?
Well, right now?
Yeah, right now.
He's my running back 4, I think.
Wow, giddy up. Good. That's a hot take, Russ. I like it. Off-season hot take. But really, I don't know that I can disagree too much. There's not any other running backs out there that you would put ahead of him,
Lamar or Doug Martin's up there. Devonta Freeman's up there, but I think
you got Gurley and you got Bell. But yeah, after that, man, it starts thinning out pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm a fan. I think I'm with you on that one. I can't look. His highest rush total or his highest number of carries in Miami was 216. 216. He should get at least 250.
250
and look,
at least.
He averages 4.5 yards a carry.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at least 1,200 yards next year. So
right.
Yeah, I think that might be the early candidate for the free agency move of the year as far as dynasty leagues go. But there were some other running backs, Russ, that were signed. Our old friend Matt Forte, both literally and figuratively, signed with the New York Jets. A very interesting signing, I thought. I did not see that one coming. I would have thought, hey, they're letting Chris Ivory go. They might ride with Bilal Powell. I don't know. But, Forte swoops in. And look, I mean, Fitzpatrick hasn't signed yet, but I would venture to say the longer he doesn't, the more likely it is he's going to go back to New York. And if he does, you've got Fitzpatrick, you've got Marshall, you've got Decker. I mean, Forte could pick up right where he left off for a year or two, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, Chan Gailey, you're looking at the combo running back committee.
You're good. I can hear you fine.
All right. Anyway, you're looking at sort of that committee, sort of like he had in Buffalo with Spiller and Fred Jackson. Obviously, Forte is going to be the Fred Jackson in that role, but I think he's going to be more of the main sort of 200 to 225 carries, maybe 40, 50 receptions. That's the type of role I see him having this year. So, yeah, I mean, I'd plug him in for top 10 this year in terms of redraft value.
I would. So, and again, we always like to play this game, Dynasty Startup, Russ. And again, he is 30, so you have to take that into account. But look, I got to believe he'll give you 1 or 2 good years. So if you were doing let's not say Dynasty Startup, because I think we'd agree he'd be drafted fairly low, but what would you be willing to give up for a Forte, assuming you had a win now Dynasty team?
Right. Win now, I'd be willing to give quite a bit. I mean, a late first rounder or something like that. He's definitely got some market value in terms of win now dynasty teams. So, yeah, I'd definitely be willing to give up something relatively significant.
And does this do anything for, and again, let's assume the status quo. Let's assume Ryan Fitzpatrick comes back. Does this do anything to beef up his value, or Brandon Marshall or Eric Decker? Or are those pretty, standalone as far as their values go?
Fitzpatrick is pretty insulated as sort of that late round quarterback regardless, just because of his reputation right now. But I mean, I love that situation for him. And obviously adding a Matt Forte in the receiving game for running backs, and then having Bilal Powell back and Decker, Marshall. I mean, that's just a great situation for him. I think we're going to see a lot of what we saw last year in terms of fantasy production.
Yeah. All right. So that, well, we've got a couple other running backs, Russ. Let's get to those. So the aforementioned Chris Ivory, which this may take the cake for most surprising signing of early free agency, signed in Jacksonville, 3-year deal. Again, I don't know anyone that saw this coming. And look, let's face it, the real story here is TJ Yeldon. Where did you go? So first, let's get to the Chris Ivory situation. He was a free agent. I don't know. I thought he was going to go back to New York. I thought he carved out a nice little niche there. And I'm sorry, not a 3-year deal, 5-year deal for $32.5 million. Excuse me. So even more money and more years than I would have thought for a 27-year-old running back. I don't know, man. What does this do to Ivory? And more importantly, what does this do to DJ Yeldon?
From what I understand from that situation, the Jaguars had a lot of money to burn, and they definitely needed some running back depth. I mean, when you look at Toby Gerhart, who was obviously a bust as a free agency signing a few years ago, they released him. And then they had Denard Robinson there as well, who's fine as sort of come in and maybe take 5 carries a game, but he's not really a second back you feel comfortable with, especially if Yeldon were to go down. So I don't think this is the end of the world for Yeldon. I think this might open a nice buy low window. They are going to likely split carries, and this is going to lower his ceiling in terms of 2016 potential. But, I mean, he was solid in the receiving game, so I don't think that's going away. But overall, I don't hate it for Yeldon as much as you would think I would. I don't think this is, bad for his career. I just think this was a depth move, and he's a solid player, and they're going to split carries this year.
Well, and you bring up a couple good points for us. I mean, I think I'm with you that this doesn't, to me anyway, completely torpedo his dynasty value. If anything, it kind of puts it back, I guess it normalizes it, right? Because I think there might have been a chance that his stock sort of got inflated again this year, when probably it shouldn't have. But I think he'll still be the first and second down guy, and Ivory might be the goal line guy, the short yardage guy. But see, the thing that confuses me is you gave all that money for a short yardage running back.
Right.
Now given they can cut him after, a couple of years and not, feel the burn as much. But, and like you said, they had a ton of money to burn. So it may have just been a case of, look, they had this money, they may as well give it to him up front. So they don't get burned on the back end of it. But, I think I'm with you. I think I'm okay with this for Yeldon. I mean, it's not going to help this year, but, if you're dynasty and you don't have him, I think this is a perfect chance to get him for a reasonable price.
And you bring up the biggest point here is that his value was going to be very overvalued. in terms of startups and stuff. There were quite a few Yeldon breakout articles coming out before the Ivory signing, and you could sort of see where it was going to end up by the end of the offseason and even sort of hedging into redraft leagues. So, yeah, this kind of just stabilizes things, pushes it back to normalcy, and I think it's going to be put him at a reasonable price in pretty much all formats now.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. All right. So I think, Russ, correct me if I'm wrong, that covers it for the running back portion of the free agency look. Let's get to the receivers. A lot of interesting moves. I wouldn't classify any as home runs or superstar moves, but several of them. Let's start with Marvin Jones. It was, I'm not going to say it was a necessity for Detroit to sign somebody after the Calvin Johnson retirement, but it kind of was. I mean, they needed something because they didn't have anything outside of Golden Tate. And I know a lot of people had dreams of Golden Tate catching 150 balls next year, but it probably wasn't going to happen. So they end up signing Marvin Jones, who, again, everyone would agree is not a top tier talent, but is probably the best talent available this year.
Mm-hmm.
Signed a 5-year, $40 million deal with them. This. I don't know, man. I don't know what to think of this. Like, they needed to fill the hole. They had the cap money, but it just seems like it's one of those moves that we're going to look at a year from now and be like, yeah, that didn't really move the needle that much.
I think it's a sneaky little move.
Really? Second hot take of the night, Russ. You're on fire.
I could see Jones sort of getting 90 targets in this offense next year, sort of being that third option. Obviously, Tate wasn't going to be a number one receiver all on his own. I sort of see this being a committee next year. Unless they draft a receiver high, which I don't envision them doing based on sort of how they drafted the past few years, and then bringing in Marvin Jones, I think that signifies they're not going to go wide receiver early on. Now, they may bring someone in second, third, fourth round, but I think this represents them sort of saying, okay, we're going to have a 1A, 1B receiver core, and then we're going to hope Ebron sort of emerges in year 3. Now, they spent a really high pick on him, and they sort of expanded his role quite a bit in 2015. And just based on how they're forming this offense, I think they're going to have they're going to try to make Ebron take the next step in year 3 in 2016. Now, that may not work, and the Lions offense might end up not doing so well. But just based on how high they drafted him and sort of their moves post Calvin Johnson, I think that's kind of where they're headed.
Well, yeah. So looking back, Matt Stafford last year, he had a nice little season, 4,200 yards, 32 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. So, not exactly top 5 numbers, but definitely top 10. I mean, if he's your starter, I think you could roll with that. And, it's hard to gauge just how important Calvin Johnson was of that offense. Obviously, he was a very important part, but the last couple of years, it wasn't like he had home run numbers. So I think you might be onto something. I think there may be something there for Marvin Jones. I think it's very possible he sets some career highs. I mean, look, his career high so far is 816 yards and 65 catches. So right. I think he's definitely in line to improve on that. I think there could be some people that look at him as sort of the Calvin Johnson savior, and maybe he gets a little overdrafted. I don't know. What do you think as far as his dynasty ranking goes?
I think those numbers you just said right there are kind of what I see for him in this offense, sort of as that 1B by committee receiver core with Tate. I see Tate getting more targets, more receptions, more yards, but I do think Jones brings some upside and can be sort of a platooned third option in an offense. But if you're looking for more than that, I don't think that's there.
And finally, Russ, you mentioned him before, Eric Ebron. Let's just get your hot take. Where are you ranking him dynasty-wise?
We're
going to put you on the record.
Definitely a top 10 dynasty tight end. I mean, probably I'd have to relook post free agency, but tight end 6 or 7. I mean, I'm projecting more targets next year and sort of projecting off of how they brought him along this year. I mean, he improved across the board in 2015. 800 receiving yards, 700 receiving yards, something like that. I mean, he had 500 this year, so 700, 800 on 110 targets is kind of what I envision them using him as next year.
Yeah, and look, I think he could be a sneaky pickup for some people too. His production has not been what we all thought it was, and definitely not worthy of his rookie draft status when he got drafted a couple years ago. But yeah, I think there's definitely opportunity, and let's face it, this is it for him. This is the make or break year. If he doesn't do it this year, then I think you can successfully write him off.
Right, and that's the thing. If you did invest in Ebron previously, this is the year that you're looking to return on your value, on your investment. So I don't think trading now would be an option or sort of looking to sell, but an interesting player that you can get for relatively cheap right now.
Yeah, but I think I'm with you, man. I don't think there's no upside to trading him away. I mean, unless somebody just gives you some Godfather deal that you can't turn down, I think you're better off it's a lottery ticket at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the cost that you incurred was 2 years ago, so it's not like it torpedoed your season this year. And look, if it works out, great. If not, look, chances are he wasn't your starting tight end to begin with.
Right.
So, all right, Russ. The other, I guess I'll say, big receiver signing, which I think you and I would agree we like more than the Marvin Jones signing. At least I do. Travis Benjamin signed in San Diego. Let's see here. He signed in San Diego. He sort of takes over the Malcolm Floyd, deep threat kind of role Malcolm Floyd, who retired. I don't know, man. I mean, 4 years, $24 million. So it's not like it's a whole lot of money that they have to force feed him the ball. But where do you think he stands in the pecking order out there?
Another sneaky move that I like. I think he's going to fit in nice with that receiver core and sort of what they're trying to do with that offense. Again, kind of like Marvin Jones, he's not going to be your wide receiver 2 in fantasy this year, or even a wide receiver 3. But I think this is more of a tactical move for the Chargers that's going to improve their offense. I think this is a nice little bump for Phillip Rivers now that he has sort of someone solid who he can throw a little deeper to. Last year, once Floyd got out, it was just like all short passes and Woodhead. So nice to have someone reliable who can go 20, 30 yards down the field and who has 4.3 speed. So
yeah, and look, hopefully, let's face it, the other receivers there in San Diego don't have the best medical records between Keenan Allen, who missed half of last season, Antonio Gates, who's just a walking medical condition. They let, obviously, Ladarius Green go over to Pittsburgh. And Danny Woodhead, who, again, puts together very solid PPR seasons, but he's no spring chicken either. So I think there's some play here. I mean, look, San Diego had the 4th best passing offense as far as yards go last year. So there's definitely opportunity. There's definitely some catches to be had. I think I'm buying on Benjamin. I really am. I didn't last year, even when he was having those crazy games with Johnny Manziel throwing him the ball for some reason. Because it was just a bad situation and it was very inconsistent. But in San Diego, look, you've got a reliable passer in Rivers. You've got other weapons that he's not going to be the primary target of the defense. I think I'm in on this. I think I could roll with this, Russ.
Definitely. And in sort of, if you play in a best ball league, definitely intriguing upside. We'll have some big games. Phillip Rivers throw 2 deep balls to him or something like that. So yeah, definitely intriguing.
All right, so last move as far as receivers go, Russ, that we'll talk about. Mike Wallace on to his 3rd team in 3 years, now with the Baltimore Ravens. He got cut, didn't sign for very much with Baltimore. Does he have anything left in the tank, Russ? I think that's a fair question to ask at this point.
I'm coming at this in two different ways. One, Mike Wallace hasn't been relevant for a while.
Okay. Fair
And
enough.
and this has a Greg Jennings feel to it. Remember how Greg Jennings kind
Wait,
of went
Greg
to
Jennings in Minnesota or Greg Jennings in Miami?
Greg Jennings in Miami? How
Oh,
he just kind of
no.
went there and faded into the distance.
And had 6 catches or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the kind of feel it has. But then the Ravens signed Chris Givens last year, and he had a few big games for the Ravens last year. So it's kind of like I like that situation. If Brashad Perriman is okay, I don't see much, if any, upside for Mike Wallace. But if Perriman ends up being a big injury risk for the future, I mean, Wallace might be forced into sort of that deep role, and I do like Flacco with his deep threats. So I mean
Look,
that's there, but I'm not buying any real upside here.
I'm not either, Russ. And look, even if Perriman doesn't, work out, there's still Kamara Aiken there, who had a very nice season in place of both Perriman and Steve Smith. 75 catches for 944 yards. I mean, he had one of the most under the radar, 1,000-yard or close to it seasons in recent memory. Mike Wallace, let's face it, as far as receivers go, is still only the fourth option. And that's not even counting Ben Watson, who they signed, or Max Williams, who, if anyone can tell me what they're doing with Max Williams, please let me know. But, yeah, I think Mike Wallace is done, man. I really do. I think you've got Smith coming back. You've got – and, look, I don't think any one of us will ever doubt Steve Smith's ability to come back, or else we're going to get punched in the face. But you've got Brashad Perriman, who hopefully, with a whole year to heal, will come back. And then you've got Aiken. I mean –
Right.
I don't think there's anything there, like nothing.
And that's,
I might pick Wallace up off waivers in my dynasty league, but would I give any pick? No, I would not get any pick for that.
That's the correct way to frame this right now. Yeah, okay, if he gets shoved into a role, sure. But right now, there isn't much upside in terms of targets.
Right. So, yeah, I think we agree. We're both out on Mike Wallace, which, look, hey, who knows? He could have gone back to Pittsburgh and maybe resumed his old Pittsburgh days. Who knows? But nonetheless, all right, Russ. Now let's get to perhaps the wackiest position in free agency this year anyway. Tight ends, of course. You had signings, you had trades. Maybe the most shocking, Kobe Fleener, for some reason, signed with the Saints for 5 years and $36 million.
That's a big boy deal too.
For a team that is perpetually cash strapped, that's what I don't get. You had Ben Watson. You could have signed him for 1 year, and anything less than the $7 million a year they're giving Fleener.
And I know a lot of people are a fan of Josh Hill as well, who they could have had. I mean, it looks like he's sort of looking at other teams right now, and he's a restricted free agent. But as a Kobe Fleener owner in Dynasty, this was kind of like, what? You
were saved from the grave if you were a Kobe Fleener Dynasty owner.
Once the Colts re-signed Dwayne Allen, you were starting to dig the grave on Fleener ever being fantasy relevant again. And then a few days pass, and he signs with the Saints, which if there was one situation better than the Colts, I mean, that's it. And the one thing Fleener's really good at in terms of football is being sort of that slot receiver type. And, I mean, with Drew Brees, I think I have the confidence in Drew Brees to pretty much make anyone pretty good. We've seen that multiple times where he makes targets really good and then they try to go somewhere else and they're awful. So Fleener was mediocre to below average with the Colts. So who knows what he can do in New Orleans, but you have to at least like him for redraft in terms of projecting targets and yards and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you consider in Indianapolis, at least this past year, he was probably, fourth, fifth in line for targets? I mean, you had Hilton, you had Andre Johnson this year for some of the year. Dante Moncrief, you had, I would say, Dwayne Allen some of the time was ahead of Kobe Fleener for receptions, but where does he on the depth chart as far as targets go for Drew Brees in New Orleans? I mean, Brandon Cooks is the 1A. There's no doubt about it. But, is it crazy to say he might be number 2?
It's not, which is crazy in itself. But yeah, I mean, Willie Snead is there. He showed he's at least worthy of a role. They might compete for some targets in terms of what they do, but yeah, I think they can both coexist. I just don't hate the move. I think he's going to see 100 targets in the Saints offense this year, which, I mean, players are so highly productive per target in that offense usually for the Saints. So you kind of have to be optimistic.
I don't know how you cannot be, even the biggest Kobe Fleener haters. I mean, look, like you said, there's perhaps no better situation for a receiving tight end than New Orleans, and he hit the jackpot literally. So, yeah, I mean, good for him. Now, the big question, he will be overhyped. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, where are you comfortable taking him in a dynasty startup? Where does he rank amongst the tight ends for you now? Top 5? Top 10?
I still need to let this simmer for a little while, but he's right in that Eric Ebron range. And I mean, if I'm being honest with myself, instead of just looking at age and how I view Ebron, I mean, Fleener should be ahead of him right now. If I'm looking at it honestly, but biases take over. And I'd probably have him in that tight end 7 to tight end 8 range. But I mean, if you want to put him higher, I have no problem with that.
Yeah, and you mentioned Josh Hill, which I think, look, they're giving all this money to Fleener. I think he's it. I mean, he's the man now as far as tight ends go. So, yeah, just truly a stunning turn of events. Look, if you were one of those lucky people with Kobe Fleener on your dynasty team who was getting ready to cut him or swap him for something, consider yourself lucky because you just hit the jackpot. So. All right, Russ, one more move, a trade actually amongst tight ends. Martavis Bryant and a 6th rounder go from the Bears to the Patriots for a 4th rounder. Everyone is reading this, Russ, as sort of, hey, it's going to be Gronk and Aaron Hernandez again. I mean, are we there, or is this, sort of, we need to tap the brake on that comparison?
I don't know. I mean, when you look at it, it looks like a great move for the Patriots, for Bennett, for everyone. But then you've seen quite a few stories over the years where players go in who are relatively talented and just get eaten up by this Patriots organization and just can't kind of handle the playbook, can't kind of handle the way they go about things. So Martavis Bennett's a pretty unique guy in terms of what I've heard about him and sort of interviews and sort of what you hear about him. So I'll be interested to see how that dynamic works. But I mean, yeah, in terms of talent and where he could fit in this offense, I love it.
Well, and you know what? You bring up a good point because it's very early in the offseason. And like you said, a lot of players you think are going to do well in New England just because of the offense they have and the personnel never work out because either they can't get on board, the coaching staff isn't a fan. I mean, a lot of reasons that they don't catch on. And I think you're right. I think there's a good possibility Bennett is one of those guys that just they didn't, that he didn't buy in or whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, I think you got to be a little hesitant with Bennett, at least so far. I don't think you should rush out and try to trade for him in a dynasty league. But look, if he ends up sticking around, I mean, look, there's just not that many other receiving options there in New England. I mean, it's he's almost the de facto like 3rd or 4th option there if he does stick around, and assuming they don't spend a high draft pick on a receiver, which is not really their MO. So, yeah, I mean, he's like the definition of risk reward at this point,
Yeah, and I mean, you got to love Edelman, you got to love Gronk, but beyond that, hey, there's a lot of targets up for grabs there. So Bennett potentially, I mean, could be a big fantasy producer with a Tom Brady-led offense,
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very fascinating. And look, like you said, he's got a lot of time to either warm up to New England and Belichick and all those guys, or completely, flunk that opportunity. But only time will tell, Russ. So, all right. Well, that will conclude this edition of the Dynasty Slants. We covered a lot of ground, Russ. There'll be more ground to cover in the weeks ahead, obviously with the lead up to the draft. But until then, he's Russell Clay, and I'm Michael Moore, and we will see all of you next time.